There is a quiet misunderstanding that keeps many people trapped in unnecessary suffering. It is the belief that if nothing is happening around you, then nothing is happening at all. You look at your life and measure it by visible results. You search for movement, opportunities, recognition, or signs that your efforts have finally begun to matter. When those things fail to appear, you conclude that life has forgotten you. But the deepest transformations have never announced themselves with noise. They begin in silence, beneath the surface of awareness, where the conscious mind cannot easily observe them. The greatest mistake is assuming that silence is empty. Silence is often the place where your inner world is rearranging itself. Just as a seed appears lifeless, while it quietly develops beneath the soil, your mind and spirit may be preparing for a future your present self cannot yet fully comprehend. From the outside, nothing seems different. The same routines continue. The same questions remain unanswered. Yet within you, invisible structures are being built. Old patterns are weakening. New perspectives are taking root. The person you have been is slowly making room for the person you are becoming. This is difficult for the conscious mind to accept because it desires certainty. It wants proof before it believes. It wants visible progress before it commits to hope. It constantly asks, "When will my life change?" But this question is often asked too early. A wiser question would be, "What inside me is changing while I wait?" That question shifts your attention away from the clock and toward your own development. Consider how often people wish for a completely different life while unconsciously holding on to the same habits, the same fears, and the same identity. They want a new chapter without becoming a new person. Yet life rarely works that way. A different future requires a different relationship with yourself. Before circumstances transform, perception must transform. Before opportunities can be sustained, character must expand. Before responsibility increases, awareness must deepen. Many people interpret delay as rejection. They imagine that because something has not arrived, it never will. But what if delay has another purpose? What if the pause is not punishment, but preparation? Imagine handing tremendous responsibility to someone who has not yet learned patience. Imagine giving lasting success to someone whose identity still depends entirely on external approval. The gift itself could become a burden. Growth without inner readiness often destroys what it was meant to bless. This is why life's timing frequently feels mysterious. It is not only events that must align. The individual receiving those events must also be ready. That readiness cannot always be rushed. It develops quietly through experiences that seem ordinary, even disappointing. Every setback teaches endurance. Every uncertainty exposes hidden fears. Every unanswered question invites deeper self-reflection. These moments appear insignificant while you are living them. Yet together they shape the foundation upon which your future rests. There is another truth that many overlook. During seasons of apparent stillness, the unconscious continues its work. It collects forgotten experiences, unresolved emotions, unnoticed lessons, and hidden strengths. It slowly weaves them together into a more complete understanding of yourself. You may not recognize this process while it unfolds, because much of it occurs beneath ordinary awareness. Yet one day, you respond to a familiar situation differently than before. You notice that an old fear no longer controls you. A criticism that once wounded you loses its power. A decision that once felt impossible becomes obvious. that moment, you realize the transformation did not begin today. It began long ago, quietly, while you believed nothing was happening. This inner development is rarely dramatic. It does not demand applause. It often feels like nothing more than subtle shifts in perspective. You become slightly calmer in uncertainty, slightly less reactive to disappointment, slightly more willing to trust yourself. These small changes seem insignificant individually, but over time, they alter the entire direction of a life. Great transformation is rarely one giant leap. More often, it is the accumulation of countless invisible moments that slowly reshape your identity. Do not become discouraged simply because your eyes cannot yet see what your deeper self is preparing. The visible world is often the final chapter of a story that has been unfolding invisibly for much longer. Long before a tree reaches toward the sky, its roots have already learned how to hold it steady. In the same way, your unseen growth is creating the strength required for what is coming next. Perhaps what you have called waiting has never been empty at all. It has been the quiet beginning of your transformation. If the first change begins in silence, the second begins with honesty. Not honesty about the world, but honesty about yourself. There comes a moment in every meaningful transformation when you can no longer blame circumstances for everything that feels unfinished. You begin to realize that while life presents obstacles, there is another force quietly shaping your future from within. It is the part of yourself that longs for growth, standing face to face with the part that fears it. Most people believe they are waiting for the right opportunity. Yet if they look carefully, they may discover they are also waiting for permission to become someone different. They dream of confidence while protecting their insecurity. They desire freedom while remaining loyal to familiar limitations. They pray for change while unconsciously resisting everything that change requires. This conflict is rarely visible because it does not speak in obvious words. It disguises itself as logic, caution, perfectionism, or the feeling that tomorrow will somehow be easier than today. There is a hidden side within every person that prefers what is familiar over what is possible. Even when the familiar causes pain, it offers certainty. The unknown, no matter how promising, asks you to release an identity that has accompanied you for years. That is why genuine transformation often feels uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. You are not simply changing your circumstances. You are changing your relationship with yourself. Notice how often fear wears convincing disguises. Sometimes it calls itself patience when it is actually avoidance. Sometimes it calls itself humility when it is really self-doubt. Sometimes it presents itself as responsibility while quietly protecting you from taking necessary risks. The mind has remarkable ways of defending the identity it already knows. It convinces you that staying where you are is wisdom, when in truth, it may simply be fear dressed in respectable clothing. This does not mean you should reject every fear. Fear has an important purpose. It alerts you to danger and encourages careful thought. But there is another kind of fear that does not protect your life. It protects your limitations. It whispers that you are not ready, not capable, not worthy, even after years of preparation. It keeps repeating stories that no longer belong to the person you are becoming. If you never question those stories, they quietly become the boundaries of your existence. Many people spend years asking why certain doors never open, without realizing they have built invisible walls inside themselves. These walls are made from old disappointments, childhood beliefs, painful memories, and repeated failures that gradually become personal identities. A single rejection becomes, "I am not good enough." One betrayal becomes, "People cannot be trusted." One mistake becomes, "I always fail." Over time, these conclusions settle deep within the unconscious, influencing every decision without asking your permission. The remarkable thing is that these inner walls often remain invisible until life invites you towards something greater. Suddenly, an opportunity appears, yet hesitation rises. A meaningful relationship enters your life, yet fear pushes it away. A new direction calls to you, yet your first instinct is to retreat. You assume the obstacle exists outside you, when in reality, the greatest resistance is occurring within. This is why self-awareness becomes one of the most courageous acts a person can practice. Instead of asking, "Why isn't life changing?" you begin asking, "What part of me is afraid of the very future I claim to want?" That question changes everything. It shifts your attention away from blaming circumstances and toward understanding yourself. It allows hidden fears to become visible, and what becomes visible no longer controls you in the same way. Transformation does not require perfection. It requires willingness. You do not need to eliminate every fear before moving forward. You simply need to recognize that fear does not deserve the final decision. Courage has never meant the absence of uncertainty. It means choosing growth, even while uncertainty remains beside you. As you continue this journey, you will notice something surprising. The qualities you believed were holding you back often contain the very lessons needed for your future. Your sensitivity teaches compassion. Your disappointments cultivate wisdom. Your failures develop resilience. Even the parts of yourself you once rejected can become sources of strength when they are understood instead of denied. The future you seek does not belong to the version of you that remains divided against itself. It belongs to the one who has learned to face the hidden corners of the mind without turning away. The more honestly you meet yourself, the less power your unseen fears possess. And when those fears begin to loosen their grip, you create the inner space where real change can finally take root. The life you are waiting for may begin the moment you stop running from the parts of yourself that have been waiting to be understood. Once you begin facing the hidden conflicts within yourself, something subtle starts to change. Not necessarily in the world around you at first, but in the way you experience it. The same streets, the same conversations, the same ordinary moments begin to carry a different kind of meaning. It is not because reality has suddenly transformed overnight. It is because your awareness has become more attentive. When the inner world begins to move into greater harmony, the outer world often appears to speak in a language you had overlooked before. Many people spend their lives searching for dramatic signs, expecting life to announce every important change with unmistakable certainty. They imagine that transformation should arrive like a thunderstorm, impossible to ignore. Yet, the deeper movements of the psyche rarely reveal themselves in such obvious ways. They emerge quietly, through moments that seem ordinary, until you look at them more carefully. A chance conversation that answers a question you have carried for months. A forgotten memory that suddenly returns at exactly the right moment. A dream that refuses to leave your mind. A book that finds you when its message becomes necessary. An unexpected encounter that gently redirects your entire perspective. It is tempting to dismiss these experiences as coincidence. Sometimes they are. Not every repeated number, every familiar symbol, or every unexpected event carries profound significance. The human mind naturally looks for patterns, and wisdom requires discernment rather than blind certainty. Yet there are moments when a coincidence seems to carry a deeper emotional weight, as though it connects something within you to something unfolding in your life. Its importance is not found in superstition, but in the meaning it awakens inside you. These meaningful moments do not create your destiny. They invite you to pay attention to it. They act less like commands and more like quiet mirrors, reflecting what has already begun to change within your own consciousness. The outer event may appear small, but your response to it reveals that your inner landscape is no longer the same. You notice connections that once escaped your attention because your mind has become more open, more reflective, and more willing to listen instead of constantly trying to control. Consider how often answers arrive only after the right question has been formed. Before that moment, the answer may have existed all along, yet you lacked the awareness to recognize it. The world has not necessarily changed. You have. Your perception has become refined. What once seemed random begins to reveal relationships. What once felt meaningless begins to fit into a larger pattern. This is one of the quiet rewards of inner development. Reality becomes richer because your capacity to understand it has expanded. Dreams often become part of this process. During sleep, the conscious mind loosens its grip, allowing deeper layers of the psyche to express themselves through images, symbols, emotions, and stories. These dreams are rarely straightforward predictions. They speak a symbolic language rather than a literal one. A collapsing house may reflect an outdated identity rather than a physical building. A long journey may represent psychological growth rather than geographical travel. A child, an old guide, a forest, a river. These images can become expressions of inner realities that words alone cannot easily capture. Many people ignore these messages because they expect certainty where symbolism exists. But symbols are powerful precisely because they cannot be reduced to simple formulas. They invite reflection instead of obedience. They encourage dialogue with the deeper parts of yourself, rather than passive dependence on external answers. The more patiently you observe these recurring images and experiences, the more clearly you begin to understand the conversation taking place within your own mind. There is another remarkable shift that often occurs. Your intuition becomes quieter yet more trustworthy. It no longer rushes you with anxiety or desperation. Instead, it speaks with unusual calmness. You find yourself sensing which conversations deserve your energy and which ones do not. Certain opportunities feel naturally aligned, while others lose their attraction without any obvious explanation. You begin making decisions that seem small in the moment, only to realize later that they gently redirected the course of your life. This growing awareness should never become an excuse to abandon reason. Wisdom is found in the balance between careful thought and deep intuition. The unconscious offers valuable insights, but they become most meaningful when examined with honesty, patience, and humility. Neither blind skepticism nor blind belief leads to understanding. The path forward requires both an open mind and a disciplined one. As this process continues, you may notice that life feels less like a collection of disconnected events and more like an unfolding conversation. Not because every experience has a hidden message waiting to be decoded, but because you have become someone capable of discovering meaning where you once saw only randomness. The change is not that the world has started speaking more loudly. The change is that you have finally learned how to listen. And perhaps that quiet shift in awareness is the first unmistakable sign that your next chapter has already begun. By the time you begin noticing these quiet moments of meaning, another realization slowly emerges. You discover that the greatest turning points in life rarely announce themselves with dramatic fanfare. We have been taught to expect transformation to arrive all at once, as though one extraordinary day will erase every struggle that came before it. We imagine that when our time finally comes, everything will change in a single moment. But life has a quieter rhythm than that. The most important chapters often begin so gently that you almost miss them. Think about how a sunrise unfolds. There is no sudden explosion that separates night from day. Darkness gradually gives way to light until, almost without realizing it, the entire landscape has changed. Your own transformation follows a similar pattern. It begins with small adjustments that seem almost insignificant in isolation. A new thought replaces an old belief. A healthier boundary is established. A conversation ends differently than it would have months ago. You choose patience where you once reacted with anger. These moments appear ordinary, yet together they reshape the direction of your entire life. The mind often overlooks gradual progress because it is fascinated by dramatic results. It celebrates sudden success while ignoring the quiet disciplines that made that success possible. Yet lasting change is almost always built through repetition rather than revelation. One decision rarely transforms a life by itself. Thousands of small decisions made consistently over time, create a completely different person. This is why many people fail to recognize that their next chapter has already begun. They continue waiting for an unmistakable sign while living through the very process that will eventually produce it. They imagine that change begins after circumstances improve, when in reality circumstances often improve because they have already begun changing from within. Consider someone who has spent years doubting themselves. There is rarely one morning when they wake up completely fearless. Instead, confidence grows quietly. They speak up once when they would have remained silent. They attempt something difficult despite uncertainty. They recover from disappointment a little faster than before. They stop seeking approval in places that once controlled them. None of these moments seem extraordinary, yet each one weakens an old identity and strengthens a new one. This gradual transformation is not a sign that progress is slow. It is evidence that progress is becoming stable. What changes overnight often disappears just as quickly. What develops patiently tends to endure because it becomes woven into your character rather than borrowed from temporary emotion. There is wisdom in this gradual unfolding. Imagine if every lesson arrived instantly, without effort or reflection. You might possess knowledge without understanding. You might receive opportunity without responsibility. You might gain influence without the maturity needed to use it wisely. Growth is intentionally slower than desire, because character cannot be rushed without becoming fragile. Many people become discouraged simply because they compare their invisible journey to someone else's visible results. They look at another person's achievements and conclude that their own life has fallen behind. Yet every meaningful transformation follows its own rhythm. A tree does not compete with the river, and the river does not envy the mountain. Each fulfills its purpose according to its own nature. In the same way, your path unfolds according to experiences that are shaping a future unique to you. When you stop measuring progress only by external milestones, you begin noticing changes that truly matter. You become less controlled by temporary emotions. Your decisions become clearer because they are guided by values rather than impulse. You no longer need constant reassurance that you are moving in the right direction. There is a quiet confidence that develops when your actions begin aligning with your deeper self. You may also notice that certain relationships naturally evolve. Some people who once understood you no longer recognize the person you are becoming. Others unexpectedly enter your life with conversations that challenge, encourage, and expand your perspective. This is not always comfortable. Every genuine transformation asks you to release something that once felt familiar. Old identities, old expectations, and even old versions of success begin losing their grip. At first, this feels like uncertainty. Later you realize it was freedom. There comes a point when you look back, not because everything around you has become perfect, but because you realize you no longer see the world through the same eyes. Problems that once consumed your attention no longer define your peace. Fears that once dictated your decisions have become quieter. You discover that the greatest miracle was never an instant change in circumstances. It was the gradual reshaping of your own consciousness. That is why life's most profound turning points often appear ordinary while they are happening. A simple conversation, a difficult decision, a quiet morning of reflection, an unexpected act of courage. These become the unnoticed beginnings of an entirely different future. Only with time do you recognize that the moment you thought was ordinary was actually the doorway into a new chapter. And perhaps the change you have been waiting to witness has already begun. One quiet step at a time. As your understanding deepens, another truth begins to reveal itself. One that often feels paradoxical at first. The more desperately you try to force life into your preferred timeline, the more distant peace seems to become. You begin believing that happiness exists somewhere ahead of you, waiting behind the next achievement, the next opportunity, or the next breakthrough. Every day becomes a measurement of what has not yet happened. Every delay feels like evidence that something has gone wrong. Without realizing it, you become a prisoner of the future, unable to fully inhabit the present. The mind naturally seeks certainty, because certainty promises safety. It wants to know exactly when the waiting will end, when the reward will arrive, and when the struggle will finally make sense. But life rarely reveals itself according to our preferred schedule. It unfolds through a rhythm that asks for participation rather than control. This is difficult because control creates the comforting illusion that if we think hard enough, plan carefully enough, or worry intensely enough, we can guarantee the outcome we desire. Yet worry has never created wisdom. Anxiety has never accelerated genuine growth. Obsessing over perfect timing often blinds us to the opportunities already standing quietly before us. There comes a moment when you realize that your greatest source of exhaustion is not the uncertainty itself. It is your constant attempt to eliminate uncertainty. You spend so much energy resisting the unknown that you have little energy left to experience the present with clarity. The future becomes an endless destination that keeps moving farther away because your attention is never where your life is actually unfolding. This is why inner peace is not the reward that arrives after life becomes perfect. It is the foundation from which wise action becomes possible. When you stop demanding that every question be answered immediately, your mind begins to settle. In that quieter state, your perception changes. You notice possibilities that anxiety had hidden. You hear your own intuition more clearly because fear is no longer shouting over it. Decisions become less reactive and more intentional. Many people imagine that surrender means giving up. But true surrender is something entirely different. It is not the abandonment of effort. It is the abandonment of unnecessary struggle. It is releasing the belief that every outcome must obey your expectations before you allow yourself to experience gratitude, confidence, or hope. You continue moving forward, but you are no longer driven by desperation. Your actions come from purpose instead of panic. There is tremendous freedom in this shift. You stop asking, "How can I force life to happen?" and begin asking, "How can I become fully present for the life that is already unfolding?" That single change transforms your relationship with time. Instead of treating every delay as an enemy, you begin viewing each moment as an opportunity to become a little wiser, a little stronger, and a little more aware. Ironically, this is often when meaningful opportunities begin appearing. Not because the universe suddenly changed its mind, but because you have changed the way you meet reality. You recognize possibilities that were always there but remained invisible while your attention was consumed by fear and impatience. You respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. You choose relationships based on genuine connection rather than loneliness. You make decisions from clarity rather than desperation. The external changes because the internal observer has changed. Readiness is rarely announced by a feeling of complete confidence. Most people never feel completely prepared for the movements that shape their lives. Readiness reveals itself through willingness. You move forward despite uncertainty because you trust your ability to learn. You accept that mistakes are not evidence of failure, but companions of growth. You stop waiting to become fearless before taking the next step. The remarkable thing is that life often meets you differently when you are no longer trying to control every outcome. Conversations become more authentic because you are not trying to impress. Relationships deepen because you are not trying to possess. Work becomes more meaningful because you are guided by contribution rather than constant comparison. Even disappointment loses some of its power because your identity no longer depends entirely upon external results. This does not mean every desire immediately becomes reality. Challenges continue. Unexpected obstacles still appear. There will always be seasons that test your patience and your faith. But your relationship with those seasons changes completely. You no longer see them as interruptions to your journey. You recognize them as part of the journey itself. Every experience, whether joyful or difficult, becomes another opportunity to deepen your understanding of yourself. Over time, you begin noticing something extraordinary. The future you once chased so desperately seems to draw closer without the same exhausting effort. Not because you stopped caring about your dreams, but because you stopped allowing your peace to depend on their immediate arrival. You become someone who can act with determination while remaining inwardly calm. That balance is rare, and it carries a quiet strength that no external achievement alone can provide. Perhaps the moment you stop chasing perfect timing is the very moment you become ready to receive what time has been preparing for you all along. As you reach this point in the journey, it becomes possible to see your life through a different lens. The questions that once demanded immediate answers begin to lose their urgency. The need to know exactly when everything will happen slowly gives way to a quieter confidence. Not because every uncertainty has disappeared, but because you have discovered something more valuable than certainty. You have discovered trust in the person you are becoming. For a long time, you may have believed that your future depended entirely upon external events. You thought that one opportunity, one relationship, one achievement, or one unexpected breakthrough would finally transform everything. Yet, as your understanding deepens, you begin to recognize that the most important transformation has never been waiting outside you. It has been unfolding within you, quietly, patiently, often beyond your immediate awareness. Every season that seemed meaningless has contributed something essential. The disappointments taught you where you had placed your identity too carelessly. The delays revealed how tightly you clung to control. The moments of loneliness introduced you to parts of yourself you had spent years avoiding. Even your failures carried lessons that success could never have taught. Looking back, you begin to realize that nothing was entirely wasted. Experiences you once wished to erase became the very experiences that expanded your wisdom. This does not mean suffering should be celebrated for its own sake. Pain is real, and some chapters leave wounds that take time to heal. But healing often reveals a remarkable truth. What once appeared only as loss gradually becomes a source of compassion, resilience, and understanding. The wound no longer defines your identity. Instead, it becomes part of the story that allows you to recognize the struggles of others without judgment. There is a quiet strength that develops when you stop measuring yourself by what has happened to you and begin measuring yourself by who you have become because of it. The person who once depended entirely on external approval begins finding stability within. The one who feared uncertainty begins discovering curiosity instead of panic. The one who constantly searched for signs begins recognizing that the clearest evidence of transformation is not found outside, but in the calmness that now exists inside. This is the true beginning of freedom. You are no longer living only in reaction to circumstances. You are responding from a deeper center that remains steady even when life becomes unpredictable. Your decisions become less driven by fear and more guided by wisdom. You no longer chase every opportunity simply because it appears attractive. You begin asking whether it truly aligns with the person you are becoming. That question protects you from many distractions that once would have stolen your attention. You also begin understanding that your future is not something waiting at the end of the road. It is being created by the person you choose to become each day. Every honest conversation, every courageous decision, every act of patience, every moment of self-reflection quietly shapes the life you will eventually inhabit. Destiny is rarely built through isolated moments of greatness. More often, it is formed through ordinary choices repeated with extraordinary consistency. There will still be days when doubt returns, Old fears may whisper familiar stories. You may occasionally wonder whether you are truly making progress. When those moments arrive, do not mistake temporary uncertainty for permanent failure. Growth is not a straight path. It moves in cycles. Some days reveal clarity, while others invite deeper reflection. The important thing is not to avoid every moment of confusion. It is to keep walking even when certainty is absent. Remember how this journey began. You believed silence meant nothing was happening. Then you discovered that silence often hides preparation. You confronted the hidden fears that quietly resisted change. You learned to notice meaningful patterns without becoming dependent upon them. You recognized that transformation rarely arrives in dramatic explosions, but through countless small shifts in awareness. You discovered that peace begins when the need to control every outcome is finally released. Now all of those lessons come together. They were never separate ideas. They were different expressions of the same truth. Life has not merely been asking you to wait. It has been inviting you to become. Every experience has been shaping a mind capable of greater wisdom, a heart capable of greater compassion, and a character capable of carrying responsibilities that once would have overwhelmed you. Perhaps this is why the timing you questioned for so long now begins to make sense. You were never simply waiting for life to change. Life was patiently allowing you to grow into someone who could truly receive what was coming without being destroyed by it. The delay was not the absence of purpose. It was the quiet work of preparation taking place beneath the surface of your awareness. So when you leave this moment, do not leave searching desperately for proof that tomorrow will be different. Leave with something far more enduring. Leave knowing that every step toward greater self-awareness is already changing the direction of your future. Trust the quiet work that has been taking place within you, even when the results are not yet visible. The life you have hoped for may be closer than you imagine, not because time suddenly accelerated, but because you have become the person prepared to meet it. Perhaps God's timing has been closer than you ever believed, because it has been shaping you long before you were able to recognize it.